Max, I think you need to go back to
Yes.
the main room to get permission to record from Scott.
Oh, okay.
Scott had me record. I'm a co-host and it's recording now. He said you all are also recording or something, so I'll let you all figure that out. But I am
give
recording.
any consent that's necessary.
Wait, Elmer, are you recording?
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, cool.
Also, Max, take off the sweatshirt.
Okay,
man.
sure.
Okay, cool. Thank you. This is important, everyone.
Thank you, Elmer.
You'll get value to that from this, I promise. Well, I will, but I don't know if y'all will. There we go.
Is everyone good with the speech drop instead of an email chain? My email's been really slow this weekend.
Yeah, I think yes, because there are some spectators who also probably want to see.
All right, as soon as everyone's like, we just start around, I'll send it out. We can get started.
Wait, did you already send the speech link?
Not yet. I'll put it in chat.
Okay.
And then before I begin the 1AC, there are just two quick notes to make. The first is that whatever happens the next 45 minutes, I would really like to encourage robust post-round discussion of the contents of this debate after the round. And the second is that the beginning of this 1AC will have music. Is everybody okay with that? Sounds good.
I'd love to hear the music.
Does everyone have the doc?
What? 1 second.
I also there when I got it.
Oh my god, this is gorgeous. Okay, I'm good.
All right, anyone not ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, it's gonna have to be kind of near the mic. We'll see if the volume works. This rule, one state a nation can survive its faults and even ambition, but it cannot survive treason within itself. Brand 18, sustaining their strategy, told persuading public to recommit rebuild drugs and for rolling back their strategy scenes, victim of its own success and devil is becoming problematic, sustaining brand strategy for part public clever need to articulate the value of alliances. Thus, we affirm that American middle hegemony is just vote after to embrace the terrifying stream of our precision-guided missiles fought off the production line from their contract with Lockheed Martin, whistling to strike an overseas target offense. Be highly skeptical of Heg Bad arguments. Their evidence is epistemic against the second, bought off by revisionist powers, Gilsman, 20 China's propaganda, worship, information, weapon, facility, obfuscation, consumer, hyperbolic, Palmer, Shining, communist party, propaganda campaign, level hour, disinformation, party battle with the United States, journalists, by propaganda, positive propaganda, Beijing, much bigger pressure on the difference China reducts from maybe manipulation, tactic, the artists, long-term goal of that, being most powerful political entity, the planet sees new all games, attack, greedy USS party, still depends on the ambiguous leadership in this decade, solves global war, results in peaceful end to Chinese revisionism, Ericsson and Collins and Chen, 21, Chinese power, 60 Congress, direction, strength, understand, planet, 50 is good, executive nature, physical, realize the short term for most critical goals, structural problems are ordered, these damage Taiwan, Z internalizes this challenge foreign policy, become more accepting, risk, video, shark country, revisionist action, build rights, national nation, resistant, champion, to border challenges, AD, occupying Tibet, and perfection, crimes, humanity, serial legacy, enveloping Hong Kong, Kong, Tarks, and China's strategic fame, not fully manifest, just 2030, Beijing will conclude 2020 time frame favor, China, deter Chinese aggression, US plan, starting out before the unity of China power, try 2030 across the form, which never recovered, China's health, dead, amply sound, structural economic trade, merger, most shortly, the different United States, China faces Holland, but of its working population, and security, oil and gas will be again. These dynamics were question about its ability to deliver it, so sure it has takes about national United States, maintains a formidable advantage, profit only go down, which I failed to destroy rules-based order and transposition, subjugating neighbors to agree they could also shooting head with deterrence off the high probability of avoiding certainly China would do US homeland would be strategically worse. American deterrence takes them calm down the load for China's just let the line against frequent sustainable enforcement disincentivize dull Chinese assaults and China's long-term can't become a hegemon because of slow growth international constraints, but short-term lunges for power trigger immediate war only deterrence from onshore presence is Seoul, Beckley, and Brands 1217. Trump is facing competition to fuse with China illustrated was based on China's narrowing facing a slowdown international backlash, Russian war, finding real Beijing, large geopolitical matter, growth through sharp productivity, decline, building steady, folded, then hope reversing Chinese solution, building working digital, social unrest, rise global, anti-Chinese sentiment, sword in the most desperate national power panel, and the same from war the time was running toward US and panel, blood source of Chinese aggression, it's sustainable but not impervious to collapse brands, 20 war, most lethal competition, war, strong kind of economy, turbulence, safety, fast and curtailing for power threats, and home Beijing, flexibility, security provider, can offer the open market, China's raw power ability, to include one on China remix to international system, character structure of great power, the US reigning power, that often time to predetermine overwhelming powers, key uncertainty, alone emboldens revisionism and erodes alliances, France and Edel 19. There is level uncertainty, US foreign uncertainty, a destabilizing factor going to hit the US alliance and only with the American Convention are collaborating provoke revision challenges perception. You have readiness to be eroding international turmoil and dangerous bad time to slow America's global world is precisely what's happening, and promising ally commitments, also restoration of great power, war, directional defense that ignores emerging instability, compounding risks and unipolarity, sustainable stealth tower vacuums and aspirations across the globe, land brands 18 Americas, limited overwhelming military press, power production of earthly keepers, Europe and leads to China, military government, power vacuum, global strategies, everything versus these terrorism, military counter alliance, commitments, norms reflect our power, reality, strategy, requires challenge arms, to erode alliances, news credibility, working your rifles and bulletin cars that go and address them, will use character, high level security, working data, reading for gas, price, and dark and great power combination, attack China, Russia, seeking regional hegemony, Russia, same company, emphasizes nuclear weapons, from Ukraine, and Nigeria, power projection, E2D, and a strong alliance that works as an impact filter, souls, great power, war, growth, democracy, France, and Level 19, preventing great power, international aggression, European, reverse aggression, holding democracy, defending liberal leadership, inclusion divided, natural use of this division, American alliance, social future, unity, outmaneuvered, strong, correlated measures, supersede international order, formally fully committed, also confirm revision, time with the Israel confession, the critical challenge of materialized access to your butt, offshore balancing fails, weak American response, sparse global instability, Broman 17. Little disagreement in Merkel outship people are unfortunately the next order China, Russian autocrats and they are the ones for deploying the ones who geopolitical freedom, how will their close hours read deployment, look at our upcoming Middle East and increasingly shuffle Asian, not leave these back in US, not avoid restructure, save weakness and force wars reforms involved in South China Sea, waterways and resumption of America, like effective military allies in Southeast Asia, pursuits inevitable lines, a hardliner temperament 21 America, that country, they were virtually power division, President Washington trying to get trying to lead war, it's alleged for host of democracy, punishment in the US supporting Yemen administration, time for open policy, this is exceptional. The US says, which goes trying to get back your historical analysis, disprove stable transition, Beckley 15 great powers, security allies avoid over attention, intelligence, strategic facility, military, American leaders to financial interests, saying something the US intervene directly, leaving without partners, and conventional military overmatches, hate prevent allied proliferate outweighs all other commitments, lost and not spend 19, trade release divisions of retaliation, lack of visible credibility, sanction, and attack with these US positioning forward deploy forces, and US forces based of aggression can enhance returns of military infrastructure, underpinning allies battle for coming state application to nuclear weapons out of nowhere, confidence res US, two presidents in the country, US was spending personal cuts and lost faith, US security guarantees, decline causes unstable nuclear alliances, causes war, hates 18 during post-hegemonic alliance, Afro nuclear collision, the linear actual nuclear war, uncertainty, nuclear hegemonic system, when to pass polish committee bureaucratic and shows major short residual aspects of culture here to restore all the states, making nuclear risk east to threats and left until nuclear war breaks down, full blown American nuclear security, fear states and nuclear weapons, nuclear states and illegally bounding productively rules, same able to do until larger forces can try to fight more than one nuclear war to 100% nuclear weapons release shock and so relief for nuclear war caused by proliferation, including 15 nuclear weapons, which is a fear threat, including nuclear cost instability, we can alliance and use states to strike incentive percentage strike and disarming use with pressure, initiating nuclear crisis, planning for commissions to increase nuclear war, and increase the risk of nuclear terrorism, nuclear weapons and nuclear power, which is the certain weapons need a low level of aggression and war crisis was only catastrophic nuclear exchange. China is revisionist, its ambitions are regionally checked in containment key to preventing nuclear conflict, for 18 days of leading to overseas static international order starting from global government should be building hegemony, economic polarization, not overcome subjugation, expand political military influence. China's much of runs through stability, economic intervention, prevent a war for Germany. I can bear emphasis returns transition theory, not dealing with warfare to action to behave rationally, the possibility for increases do not share value shape trust goals not strong enough overcome their trust. Stick to offshoring stuff for now. Removing presence makes terror worse by emboldening extremism and underlying security networks necessary for counterinsurgent strategy. Brands 18 balances the right present. Sometimes it's similar to extreme violence word to these issues balance word of the problem station. Troops and also contribution being one called anti-American technology and one that would gratify for the age written first with Western culture, other grievances, you intelligence license sensitive issue operator avoiding the presence would be addressed when complete to actually be aggravated decreases of further troop offshore strategy with the US line authority and air efficient goal stability, increasing military dictatorship partnership support, friendly dictatorship radical support, deploy offshore balance to require doubling down to how resentment. Celtic Court resentment. Skipped the Adenheim evidence, the two Adenheim cards. Good for Krauss.
Okay, great. Krauss, you good?
Yep.
Cool. The highly skeptical of Heg Bad arguments. This seems to be about positive propaganda about COVID-19. Why does that mean every argument against hegemony is
it's in the context of delegitimizing the importance of US overseas presence in the international order. That can be accomplished through a couple of means.
Wait, Max. This says the CCP has evolved in its themes and tactics to amplify disinformation on COVID-19. Where is this contextual to like American hegemony?
Well, it then goes on to conclude that it is representative of larger Chinese diplomats, official media, and Twitter influencers trying to preserve the CCP's cratering reputation.
Where does it conclude that?
The next line.
Where it says the CCP evolved in the same tactics over the course of the coronavirus information war so far. Like I don't know. Okay, you know what? That's fine.
And the last paragraph of the card as well indicates the motivation behind that tactic.
Max, why is China decline inevitable?
A couple of factors. First is economic sort of stagnation. We've read evidence that for too long it has relied on sort of like domestic production, but as a result of an aging workforce and declining sustainability in the country, it needs to orient itself towards what's closer to a service-based economy where like the United States relies on most of its goods from overseas, but it doesn't have the infrastructure and trade alliances and networks built up to do that. Secondly, there's a sort of like economic explanation of why the growth it's sort of accrued over the past 20 years is about to hit a bubble, which will hurt G in the CCP when that happens, especially since G is not passing the sort of policies or taking the domestic economic reform that would be necessary to avoid that sort of imminent economic collapse. And then lastly, we've made an argument that long-term sustainability requires the sort of alliance network that China just doesn't have.
Okay, that's fine. Why does offshore balancing fail?
A couple of reasons. So firstly, there's a perception-based issue where even if in the abstract allies were capable of protecting and defending themselves without onshore US presences, the sort of like long process of several decades of getting them accustomed to onshore processes means that they would feel highly unstable and lash out as a result of decreased reliance on like NATO Article 5 packs, US destroyers in proximate regions, which would lead to things like allied proliferation, ad hoc coalitions, all of which we said are bad. Secondly, we've read evidence about how like offshore balancing is not a question of like we get offshore and never have to spend military resources again. When we go offshore, all of our most important allies are in immediate proximity to revisionist powers, which means low-level conflicts emerge. We don't intervene. They escalate to larger conflicts, which means we have to intervene with even more troops than we originally would have had to.
Okay, that's fine. Historical analysis disproves stable transition. What examples has Beckley used to prove that?
The like Beckley evidence, obviously there haven't been like a ton of historical examples where genuine singular hegemons existed, but in the context of regional locations where one great power has transitioned, we said in the context of sort of like European colonial power transitions, in the context of Athens and Sparta and the sort of Thucydides trap, and all of those examples, the hegemonic transition was violent because the hegemon wanted to hold on to power, and it outlines an explanation of how that directly mimics American foreign policy doctrine that has been omnipresent throughout Washington for the past like 3 decades.
Really quick. Okay, stop rep. I use 30 seconds. Where is case? It's in the speech drop.
there a particular order on case or just like top down? Should I like bother?
Might want another sheet, but
Is there a way to organize the 30 cards that it's about to be read, or not really?
what?
Is there a way to organize the 30 cards that's about to be read, or not really? Okay, that's good.
I just,
Okay, I'm good.
all right. Is everybody good? Great. The rest of the travel is very high. I have a little line over the flow, and the logic is bad. And shopping that impacts into lines that were established in 1718. Risk are trying to reverse study of shopping at different problem ways. And when allegations were seen, when the first time the operator would come again, shopping and manage critical decision when coming after certain time of competition, reverses the directions that more the conjugation for the world when you believe away the evidence of shopping and common drop bipolar cold weather. Of course, my position, I need allies established balance the polar press for allies first all emergency powers silence the moral has to realize the restore policy, even if some crises are doing so recurring the involving sin, fear, loss, or ability, sent by the US and Travis, fueling aggression with China, risk of power in East Asia, direct negotiation after balancing self compilation and then shivers in anything in the US and to a host of series of all military space in the SCS, ECS, neither the US nor allies have an interest in more for the US for credibility, the more credible the American resolve dependence allies, more allies active aggressive or China's related like the US China competition preserve the East Asian instability negotiate directly with the PRC to prevent China from becoming the East Asian hegemony so the search versus the crisis well built German initiatives explain the timing and form of the American response and pursuit of hegemony leads to sign of Russian alliances unstable as border PhD. 19 years multiple sponsors over structure country to work standard will be unstable demanding the problem realizing the influence of hegemony self failure balance coming to suppress every adversary rival adversaries together creating hostile coalition competition risk creating a hostile Eurasian alliance and strong Sino-Eurasian irrational alliance combined with expanded US military presence joint retaliation escalates the use of nuclear force escalating the American military forces block against the Chinese coalition includes beneficiation and Russia will prevent countermeasures include subjects economic warfare maintaining forces will prove cost of the misguided confrontation actual war forces already in contact one of these countries provoke escalation of nuclear weapons and hegemony fails propagates terrorism it justifies intervention and bigger causes blowback. I'm not reading a terminal to terrorism. They don't have one either, but they don't have one either. If you don't like in the 1 AR, but this is a link term to their hedge. This is a link term to their like offshore balancing causes terrorism argument that's been out. 19 Washington has an active military terrorism that says Al Qaeda continues to inspire offshoots that Islamic State added further terrorism. The president is supportive for little for criticism. U.S. foreign policy stuff for showing how we persevere to use force is because we're the indispensable nation that. Washington made an awful decision dealing with other nations was foreign aggression, bombing, invading, and interfering political decision has arrested terrorism with the weapon of it was against aggression rather than minimize hostility. Washington great enemies and start terrorism because ever Iraqi insurgents mutated into ISIS and unipolar is specifically responsible for the globalization of extremism makes hedge unsustainable. That's Abrahami, 18 unipolar conflict producing weapons, unipolar returns from terrorism, domestic global unipolar policy, muscle region starts from the near 70th-century warfare narrative so far, enemy-centric ideology, U.S. intervention, support against the U.S. and nation-centric warfare, now say afterwards, whether it's the hegemony through terrorism and pursuit of hedge ensures war without Iran. That's Qureshi and Qureshi. In 19, the third inflation of random tracks, how experiment and program of independent power outside the U.S. Orbit example of America's hegemonic hubris, foreign policy elite believe they have the right to ship political and every corner to rescue disaster. U.S. have pursue offshore balancing to share U.S. and United States unilateral hegemony, threatening Iran and Peninsula, Cuba, North Korea. This is outdated and displaced and U.S. allies and picking up global disarmament, limiting serious flexibility, maximum pressure cost for the economy, 5.9%, and inflation skyrocketed 31%, limiting access to foreign markets, road assurance from low disregard, and conflict escalates hedge prices, self-fulfilling prophecy, with countries on the edge meet small conflicts become deadly. Let's go glow. In 19, U.S. Iran tensions going to have a gold indication plunging into a global trying to escalation. Iran fearful of U.S. strikes would be an escalation basis when subject to attacks by the Iranian escalation forces shot down U.S. strike random and the U.S. blocked for keeping aggressive posture. Those and such random tank wars around global countries, U.S. Navy into historical precedent for Iran breaks of Iranian leadership because if you see maximum pressure, 16 driving leadership act of the international defense, Trump and Trump must be Iran stopping across the planning attacks and harassing international vessels, aggression ban and having the opposite effect of. Iran going to take the China escalation just by U.S. military triple random America into open-ended conflict. War with Iran is devastating. U.S. military takes oil volatility and great power drawn. That's how Winger, and that's war would be devastating. The Iran war, any type of retail war just in the region, actions by conflict to make yourselves away from nuclear deal, raising prices to gain leverage. Iran ruled out any tax structure we did that the U.S. was locking low policies to hawkish and previously anti-Iran war with Iran, where they colonists and had yourself to death, constantly war helped allies the rise of the Islamic State attack would be a very request Middle East. Iran has proxies allied with militant groups. Iran is border with countries the U.S. considered allies, and these are stable allies. Iran is allied with Russia, China, and chaos allies. Just Israel, Saudi Arabia, overseas. Iran would get sucked in the war with Iran be devastating, and hegemony destroys non. Actually, skip that. Go to case or like the defense stuff. The epistemology card has no words about COVID-19 and does not talk about Heg Bad authors. It's only still allowed to prove our specific authors were correct by Chinese propaganda and framing issue. No, you that's otherwise studying political psychology, check more likely in political fitness, really proves hegemony is really subject to analysis for intellectual foundation. These disasters outcomes is no consistent with hegemonic stories. They were some American beliefs and hegemonic story over responsibility control. The best people take credit for us outcomes reflect responsibility and self-service when investors stop funding its funds supported by hundreds of studies. The United States funds for this leadership over the 8,000 responses by the U.S. as various that take both pieces. Understand what's with U.S. policy motivates on control police and behavior. Empirics are most qualified studies district hegemonic stability theory is provided by some equally plausible explanations of this including common enemy, independence, war, aversion, etc. Whether that's was due to its action was clear. There's less U.S. intervention in Latin America, the less conflict warfare in Africa, as low as U.S. interest peace exists where there's intervention as well as there's not U.S. activity made the situation really worse. Hegemony plus bring in past where intervention first has been erratic. The MC hard to make the case that peace is due to the Leviathan war because China is not able as Ambrosio, and then all they see that. And significant intensification narrative company, the straight crisis continued in 1997. The general or business never, especially against 2001. There was no acknowledgement from the U.S. that policies were in any way responsible. No sense that China leaders was concerned with implication was that Beijing was simply incorrect. In 2008, meaningful intensification of the narrative, the action for connecting overturn America. This increased their narrative as displayed with evidence by the 2010 spike. It reinforced by the high point in 2012. U.S. hegemony is dead and all the Trump treaty, exit Trump foreign policy, rising power for the Sagara. And actually, American hegemony died. Forced the rise of China. The country becomes a new power with the might and mansion of the U.S. Russian could be weak from here. Just but not connected to be disrupted at 9/11. And the rest of the played a dual role in the climate of China, Washington, because self moral danger remaining around to prevent sending untold sums of military employing torture that the country was dashing out with line tearing down international alliances and norms that the final blow Trump was dropped from the TPP from Asia, coping himself to severe partnership with Europe. He's dealt with Latin America through the business, keeping immigrants allies in the country, keeping the policy. Israel and Saudi Arabia is most notable about the Trump foreign policy. Is this absence of decline is popularized restrained bipartisan coalition from the avoid the failures of liberal hegemony. Biden is not a hawk. As Ashford in 21, the growing growth for voice of the African version, their phone and perceptive audience, Biden's national security rights, both the U.S. must get better, seeing the most American power, the sentiment is out over opening versus the high level government, the Russian committee includes diversity versus anti-war activists, conservative realists, there's Bible contested path for Russian and the views of the coalition, new converse, fragment, judgment, until the gradual lessening of military commitments to the employer has failed democracy to decline this more state-based conflicts anytime since 1994 foreign terrorists failed to transgress given the lights condition that gives part of the emergence of great power her competitors Washington appears to accept the need for course correction. The market right at course correction. No empirical support for changes more. That's well for 17. Many analysts for the realize like global order will continue to grab the headline undergoing changes, adaptation, new accommodation, structural imperatives, but also you guys are in place to see each change purposes as well. All systematic warfare is often hills and mechanisms for resistance wars, excluding like the march among their states, among whose course do not hinge on the physical control of others' territory. The outside of wars probably the process be subject to empirical studies, Hegemony wars necessary rest on military disorder rather than empirical evidence. Hegemony wars many these processes and restraint works. That's Walton Mearsheimer 16. This answers their bomber whatever evidence. That's Walton Mearsheimer 16. That Osher Ross would preserve U.S. primacy. That constitution preserving U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere. Boundary president of U.S. to encourage other countries to attack cars and horses, not be them very fortunate records of political blessing laws to make powerful without expensive grand strategy. And so, in a case, it is not among them that U.S. will calibrate military distribution power. If there's no potential hegemony, there's no reason to deploy the aim is to find offshore responsibility as sometimes necessary to come ensure that U.S. would make its allies, but you can have looking at the allies moving through weight within NATO. U.S. guys for 46% GDP. That 7% of balance would reach terrorism, liberal joining them as democracy unfamiliar places. Mark credit unfamiliar places.
Good for Krauss.
Yeah.
The FetWise evidence isolates several alternative causes for relative stability under conditions of unipolarity. Examples are democracy, economic interdependence. What do you think caused the spread of democracy and economic interdependence?
Yeah, we read several cards. So we read several pieces of evidence that America did not, and America is not.
Okay, what factors?
America is not in the status quo. Wait, Max. Couple responses to that. One, you can win that America spread democracy in the past and still lose that right now American hegemony in its current state is harmful to democracy and is harmful in general. Second is that those alternative causes, interdependence, we would argue are a natural function of the world progressing because the economy has modernized, etc. Those would have happened with or without US hegemony. It's not like the United States has had its hand.
Within why are powers that aren't integrated within US alliance networks consistently not as participatory in global economic trends? If you go to sort of like
that's just not true. I think China is incredibly.
Do you think like authoritarian powers in the Middle East have the same amount of economic interdependence as similar sized countries in maybe Eastern Europe?
No, I think that China has a similar size impact like the United States. Like I think there are.
Well, yes, obviously sheer power and economic resources can overcome, but
that's the thing. Yeah, exactly, Max. That's the thing. The reason that the United States is so involved in economic affairs is because in the past it has built up its economic presence. That does not mean that the rise of China is evidence that outside of American alliance structures, it is possible to develop hegemony.
I think that attempts at democratic engagement with China played a big role in its rise, but whatever. The pursuit of Hegemony's war with Iran, did you read this or any of the cards after it?
Yeah, I read the Iran scenario. I just didn't read Prolif.
Okay, wait, so did you read any cards after Giglio 19?
War with Iran is devastating. Height Winger 19.
Okay, the tag. Okay, that's
fine. Yeah. I read the card. Like I didn't.
Okay, yeah, the card. Sorry, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
The sort of like Ashford evidence, what like policy actions has the U.S. taken in the past like year to indicate this pivot to restraint?
Yeah, so one, we think that before even like Biden took office, we think Trump like winded down like liberal hegemony, winding down war in Afghanistan, raising doubts about alliance structures, etc. Biden has withdrawn troops from Afghanistan, initiated a review of the United States global military posture, taken steps to stabilize the U.S.-Russian relationship. Those are the specific policy postures that our evidence writes about. We've also read evidence about also talks about how national security advisors and other politicians in top level of government have tried to have adopted rhetoric and policy of restraint, and has sort of grown in like a bipartisan consensus.
Okay, that's fine. I guess like the can you go through the historical examples used in the Ambrioso evidence to indicate that China doesn't have anything beyond regional ambitions?
Which evidence?
Ambrioso.
Yeah. So the argument was that like the first example it gives was the third Taiwan Strait crisis, which intensified the China threat narrative beyond what was warranted. I can continue.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just start prep.
Sure.
5 minutes.
Is it 5?
I've been using 5 the whole term. I'm gonna plunge judges.
Okay, then I'll just. I'll be right back.
35 seconds remaining. I'm gonna send the doc. Genie cards. It's uploaded.
Assuming the order is case, I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, would anyone want like a more detailed order than just like case?
Please.
Okay. So the order is going to be the sort of like top level, like hegemonic stability theory stuff, and like offshore balancing stuff. So like I don't know what a good term for this is, but like the like their alternative to the current international order versus Heg Bad, then will be the revisionism debate, then the transition debate, then like floating negative scenarios.
I'm going top down. Is that okay?
Sure.
I'm going top down too.
Yep, I'm good.
All right.
Yeah, me too. Wait. Where are the cards?
They're in the new doc. They're in the 1 AR pocket. The Penn Finals app that was sent at 246 rather than 218.
Oh, they're at the bottom. Okay.
Yeah. Bottom.
I'm ready.
Okay. Hegemonic stability theory is true. A single unipolar power that unites countries has been an overwhelming cause of democratic interdependence, economic cooperation, and checking of great powers in the past 30 years. The rise of other competing powers and limited failures is not evidence of the failure of our theory or current leadership structures, but rather inability to carry it out effectively, which is a reason why recommitment to hegemony is good. A couple of offensive scenarios. First, allied prolifs. They've conceded that U.S. alliances had become accustomed to a level of onshore presences that, if removed, would encourage nuclear balancing in order to require commitments that cause extinction from proliferation, terrorist acquisition, miscalculation, and brinkmanship, all conceding the chronic evidence. Secondly, checks great power war, hard power backbone necessary to check revisionist powers like Russia and China. The London hegemonic stability theory stuff that was evidence. All the alt causes that isolate interdependence, democratic peace theory are all produced by the presence of a single unipolar country. They haven't done data analysis. If this isn't the case, so you should use sort of basic intuition. The lower level conflict warrant no reason why that implicates sustainability, and any alternative to unipolarity would further those lower level conflicts, which means if any possibility of them escalating to greater war would mean that evidence flows. Affirmative, the Zakaria evidence that Heg is dead. They dropped the Brands evidence, which indicates that geographic isolation, advantage of U.S. alliances, and economic interdependence means that U.S. hegemony is sustainable, even if we need to do things to rectify the warrants in their cards. Treaties have been rectified and defined for the most part and can be under future administrations. Alliances weren't touched after 9/11. No reason why that would have been uniquely and Trump era foreign policy can be undone by future administrations. The sort of restraint, the Mearsheimer restraint work stuff. The framing issue for the offshore balancing debate is that the reason why offshore balancing doesn't work is because all of our allies are in proximate location to other great powers, which was the conceded Broman evidence, which means if we sort of go offshore rather than onshore, that encourages those larger powers to entrench upon our allies, which means low-level conflicts escalate into larger powerful wars, which means we have to go back onshore, means the U.S. doesn't save resources, escalates to war more quickly. The prolif turn inside of the restraint evidence. No hard-slang policies on countries can deter proliferation, even if they do nuclearize. In the case of North Korea, they're used for the purposes of defensive realism. The global governance card. If we were in revisionism, we answer that. Second piece of affirmative offense, going for transition fails. Concession to the Beckley evidence proves that there was a structural incentive for all proves there was a structural incentive for countries to try and regain power in the event that they lose unipolarity. You might be broadly correct that Biden is satisfied not having complete dominance over the global international order, but in a world where China tries to regain power, that'll cause him to lash out, dropped examples from Yemen, declarations with Putin, and efforts to increase democratic peace, which all prove Biden is committed to the sort of internationalism. They say it's not. The Ashford evidence isolates small incentives in the status quo, but it concludes that checking China is still something valuable, and if it were to become more aggressive, that would require us to go back onshore, which proves their sort of evidence is sort of bunk, and transitionary conflict would be bad. But lastly, before their scenario is proper, the sort of revisionism debate proper will concede the Gillian evidence is bought off. However, their evidence is sort of nonsense as well. It cites random world leaders and concludes that only 1/4 of them think the U.S. isn't good for global peace, which is astonishingly good for us because it proves that a single country was able to unite 3/4 of the globe around a common cause. The no revisionist ambitions, the fact that Corbyn's from 2019's red flag Hong Kong crackdowns, BRI exploration in Africa and Eastern Europe cannot be explained absent larger regional ambitions scenarios. No entanglement back to 15 animals, every military company never has U.S. state only 5 episodes line pushing U.S. commitments, in most cases, drive alignment with international obligation, policymaker, this sort of global out and up precluded military restraint over Russian, this not the disengagement of attack on the U.S. enable recklessly abroad phase train, best preclude allegation movement news to compromise tower terrorism, Britain security, which has visual force U.S. for greater insight by ISIS, cut the card at ISIS, and no reason this was escalate to great world power wars. The reason China was able to rise was not because our allies pressed, but rather because we integrated into the fold of democratic peace theory. The counterbalancing card: 1, conflicting interests in Siberia mean they wouldn't ally. 2, counter China Russia should have coalesced in the past 20 years when the U.S. is unipolarity. No reason now is uniquely key. The terrorism card will concede it doesn't have an impact, doesn't impact sustainability, which is the only third doesn't matter. The Iran evidence, they've conceded the allies are going to be aggressive, which means Israel putting hardline pressure and proliferating even more when it has ideological tensions with Iran is comparatively worse and encourages conflict to a greater degree.
$4.30. Didn't read Ismail, right?
I didn't read the second card about counterbalancing.
Ismail, right?
Yeah, I think that.
Okay. is going to be, okay, I guess to be like very clear about the order will start on the Iran scenario and then go to case. And the first words I will say on case are offshore balancing. So if that helps, and then I'll signpost from there. I guess this is all case. I meant the first words I'll say on like the aft proper. Is everyone good?
We know
Oh.
Doc, right?
Nope. Cool. Everyone good? Let me make your decision very clear. Your decision in this debate is going to be I erred negative on the risk that offshore balancing solves because Hegemony definitively causes Iran war since the 1 AR spent 4 seconds of the speech on the scenario and I had to hold the line in the 2 AR. Clinging to US hegemony ensures US-Iran conflict. 1 is retaliation. Iran escalates against the US because they hate the idea of US American hegemony and want a multilateral system. Their vice president literally came out and announced he was the bedrock. This was the bedrock of their foreign policy. Second is a self-fulfilling prophecy argument that was dropped. America securitizes Iran as a threat to hegemony because Iran is countering US regional influence in the Middle East. Their self-fulfilling prophecy creates increasing escalation in response to perceived aggression. Conflict escalates. The pursuit of US hegemony has put both sides on edge, and recent events prove that even small conflicts can trigger disproportionate responses. Near misses and threats from Iran's foreign minister and Trump proved. Trump almost retaliated against the drone strike, but canceled at the last minute. Escalation is imminent and is probable. They had one response that we can see that allies will be more aggressive absent US hegemony. No, they will not. No, they will not. Other allies like Israel have no reason to get drawn into Iran absent the United States because Israel does not have Israel's absent the United States being in Iran. Israel's not just randomly going to be like, no, let's just nuke Iran now. Obviously, there are rational leaders who calculate costs and benefits, and the cost to calculating the cost of just wiping Iran off the map would be much greater than just like whatever marginal benefit Israel would gain by taking the land. And they did not contextualize what that benefit would be, which means he should hold the line in this way. Are and arrogance arguments that are just like they were not there. Israel just like go ballistic. The impact to Iran war is massive. One is JCPOA withdrawal. Iran's nuclear capability approximate, which was the region at a unique tipping point. Second is spillover, which was dropped. Iran shares strategic borders with other unstable spaces. The US also has vested interest in, which means that they also get drawn in, i.e. Afghanistan, Lebanon, etc., which means conflict creates a ripple effect that leads to all-out Middle Eastern war. Third is great power drawn. Iran is the ultimate proxy conflict between the United States and Russia and China. Fourth is oil. War would massively disrupt the Strait of Hormuz, which causes global oil prices to skyrocket, kills the economy. 5, no defense. US policymakers would massively overestimate how easy a win versus Iran would be. Their only feasible choice would be to win the conflict, would be to send troops on the ground. That escalates, causes massive great power across the world. Could escalate to nuclear use because the United States, Russia, because that's a natural avenue to escalation between the United States, Iran, and Russia. Our evidence literally says it's open-ended escalation between the countries, which causes devastation across the world, devastation across the world, which outweighs whatever vacuous scenario they have. The 1 AR did not isolate a specific scenario a specific war or specific scenario that the United States Germany would solve just vacuously, arm wave that like. Hand wave that like solving global great power war, but without a specific scenario or specific instances of how hegemony will solve war in the future. You should err against sort of just like you should err against it in the 2 AR. You should err against it in the 2 AR. Already answered their one response. You should really hold the line. This is like 4 seconds in the 1 AR and just assert it. They literally just said Israel will go ballistic and attack Iran. There was no warrant case. Going for offshore balancing on Mearsheimer and Walcart is fantastic and is fantastic and way better than they give it credit for, or try to spin it. It's not offshore balancing. It's not just like pull out troops from every single area, but rather offshore balancing preserves U.S. regional primacy for decades, which is the best middle ground between their all-out liberal hegemony and preventing conflict from escalating in Iran due to the United States trying to put on a strategy of maximum pressure. It allows us to maintain power and preserve limited aims through promoting peace to remain offshore as long as possible. It is not possible. It's not necessary to always come onshore. In places like Iran, like we have in the past, but rather we should preserve going onshore for places where there is a legitimate competing interest. Where Iran is not one of those areas. We legitimately just want to change them into a democracy, change the regime, which is not something that we should be doing under a strategy of offshore balance. We say our allies are next to other great powers. allies. Yes, our allies might be next to other great powers. We should support them. We should also encourage them to gain their own military, which does not cause extinction, which does not cause escalation. Allies have proliferated in the past, peacefully. Iran or India, etc. Israel, etc. Which does not cause global great power. And the onus is on them to prove a single instance of when it has or will. Now I just need to put defense on hegemonic stability theory, and you vote negative on offshore balancing because they literally have zero defense to the Iran. They literally have zero defense to the Iran scenario, which means it just outweighs on strength, which means it just outweighs on magnitude and strength alone. Going for the Fedwise evidence, it was terribly handled. You say it was terribly handled. The Fedwise evidence is fantastic and talks about why peace over the past few decades is not attributable to U.S. action or U.S. hegemony. It talks about why in places where there's more U.S. intervention, there is less peace, and in places where there's less U.S. intervention, there is more peace statistically, which is statistical evidence that was just mishandled by the Twin R and not addressed. You say low-level conflict doesn't degrade instability. It's not about the stability of U.S. It's not about the stability of U.S. primacy. It's rather about the effectiveness of U.S. primacy. In order to win offense, you need to win that United States primacy, and United States intervention can actually create good results, which you are not doing. A world where you're conceding statistical analysis where U.S. intervention does not do anything. You say interdependence is caused by the unipolar country. This is a complete assertion. Interdependence is a natural consequence of the modernizing world. Yes, you should use your intuition. Do you seriously think that the fucking United States is the cause of all interdependent economic engagement ever? Obviously, China has stuff to do with that. Countries that are not allied with us have stuff to do with that. Russia sells oil. Even though they have a shack of an economy, they still are interdependent with other countries and are not our allies, which means that there is legitimate reasons why interdependence and democracy happen outside of U.S. intervention, and offshore balancing is the best middle ground of that because it prevents us from applying strategies of maximum pressure to other countries and collaborate peacefully with other great powers in matters of interdependence, which they conceded solves war, which means that even if U.S. hegemony has been good in the past, it is not needed right now because interdependence is already established, and a strategy of offshore balancing would allow us to pursue it in peace instead of trying to assert ourselves in every place that we could think of.
Uh, 3 minutes, or not 3 minutes, 35 seconds. Order is case.
I'm ready.
Everyone good? Two pieces of evidence you should frame the debate through: the concession of the peppermint evidence and all of the cards that indicate pursuit is inevitable and the U.S. will try or die to gain power, the control of global primacy, and secondly, conceded arguments that China is revisionist and given the chance, if there are not troops immediately breathing down its neck in the SES and other regional areas, it will expand as much as possible in order to establish global domination in a singular unipolar order that is an alternative to the United States. That means there is a 100% probability that any peaceful alternative to unipolarity cannot exist, because in order for that to occur, a transitionary war between the U.S. and China would occur, which would go nuclear as per conceded Brand's evidence, which means any risk of defense on the Iran scenario means you automatically vote after to try or die to ensure there is not a transitionary process. The offshore balancing answers are not responsive to this argument, because even if the U.S. does not intend to cede power entirely, bringing troops offshore would give China the green light to expand in other core regions like Africa, East Asia, and the Baltics, all of which would jeopardize U.S. security back home by threatening core allies along the line on the sort of like hegemonic stability theory stuff. I'm not going for hegemonic stability theory as sort of like a top level reason you should vote for me, because I already have a specificity based scenario for warfare. However, it's not offense for them. It's not offense for them either. The onus on them is to identify an alternative explanation for periods of peace and relative degrees of global interconnectedness other than primacy, which they have not done. Asserting, oh, it's a natural feature of human progression is definitely not sufficient. If their spread of democracy has done things, obviously the most plausible explanation is that a singular great power is telling countries to democratize if interdependence and economic growth has been established established, the most plausible explanation is that a country has established economic international institutions to help them out. Russia flows negative, affirmative. Russia is the shack and isn't connected with other countries because it's fucking sanctioned everywhere because of U.S. alliance networks, and the fact that it wasn't part of the fold, which proves that these factors are sort of parts of core components of U.S. primacy. The sort of link to interventions and those other answers to the fact what evidence no terminal impact, and they haven't articulated them as an answer to sustainability, which means all I need to answer now is the Iran scenario and the explanation of offshore balancing. Offshore balancing specifically fails in the context of China because the sort of assertion that we maintain regional primacy misunderstands what the Woldenberg-Schleimer evidence. Offshore balancing would say things like we should have carriers nearby the SCS or in the broader Atlantic, but we shouldn't mess with China until it's messing with its allies, starts to mess with us. Our argument is by then it is too late, and we are forced to go back into all-out war, which would cause larger conflict. Iran scenario. Top level, you should ask yourself, insofar they have conceded that allies are dependent on the U.S. nuclear umbrella and specific U.S. assurances to them onshore through troop-based presences and have an incentive to proliferate and form smaller alliances otherwise, which was draw pieces of evidence from the 1C and the 1AR, then is Iran going to be more threatened by a U.S. which is giving some troop commitments to Israel and has some boots on the ground, or Israel that is doubling the size of its nuclear arsenal, increasing its modernized arsenal, and forming alliances with other countries nearby? Obviously, there are tensions between the two states. Read a fucking history book. It's not just a question of Israel being aligned with the US. There are broader ethnic and international tensions that go back centuries, which means Israel getting more proximate power in the region is far more likely to trigger aggression with Iran than anything in the affirmative. Yes, this isn't terminal defense to this scenario, but it is enough to make it be massively outweighed by the affirmative. To debate.
Good round, Max.
Wait, Rahul. My entry for Emory isn't on tab.
What?
Can you check Emory
Leon,
stuff?
you're
But my entry
unmuted.
isn't there, so I don't know where to upload the form.
Dude, you're unmuted,
Jay,
John.
Jay.
Okay. Is everyone here, or at least the other judges / Max and Pranov? Okay. Okay, it looks like everyone's here. Okay. Congratulations to both of you for making it to finals of Peninsula. This was quite something to judge. It is a 2-1 for the negative.
Okay, I sat. I think the problem for the negative is you're just not on the side of truth. I'm joking. I judged the side. I judged the round technically. I voted affirmative. I think China is revisionist. I think that they attack allied countries, hotspots in the SCS, draws in everybody, causes war. Hegemony is sufficient to deter them. Plus, this sort of just like goes along with what I said above. Hedge pullout causes transition wars because other people, because there's power vacuums and great powers try to fill in. Maximum deterrence through hegemony. Offshore balancing is too slow. You can't move in fast enough, and green lights Chinese expansion. And then there's the other piece of negative defense, which is the sort of like FETwise stuff, interdependent stuff. For the FETwise evidence, one is that I don't know if like interventions disproves like transition wars or like China revisionists, because I don't think the United States is actively like intervening in like Japan or like China right now. I think they just have like bases in there. I don't know if this like, I don't know how this answers China revisionism. Second part of the like the interdependent stuff. This like interdependent institution stuff gives me the most pause, but there's a few arguments by the affirmative that make it hard for me to pull the trigger on this piece of defense. One is sort of like the 2NR gives this example of kind of like Russia's interdependent, and then two areas like Russia's actually sanctioned by alliance networks, which means they're not interdependent. If anything, the United States global-led order is the thing that is making them independent and allowing for these sanctions to happen. So plus this argument about it's the onus on you, I think the 2NR is in a little bit of an awkward spot when you're kind of like, oh, that's like natural human feature. I think you would perhaps need to explain the warrant in FETwise a little bit better than kind of just like appealing to like natural human, like natural nature of like the human world. And then the third response by the affirmative is that, you know, this interdependence is established by institutions. I think that this argument probably has like the most credence out of all these answers to like the interdependence checks argument. The problem is that I just kind of like have like assertions on both sides. It's like interdependence, natural feature, and like no, interdependence is established by institutions. I think some like historical explanations here, like oh, UN founded by or not, I don't know, or like Woodrow Wilson speared the creation of like the first like multilateral institution. He was part of the United States. So some like historical examples would like probably help you guys here. But the problem is that because it's kind of like a wash, I can't be conclusively negative on this issue and grant you like this piece of defense to the affirmative scenario. So I think AF scenario is like pretty high. Last thing is it's just like no need for hegemony right now. Yes, need for hegemony right now because China. Now the negative or yes, the negative scenario on Iran, what frames Iran for me is that some sort of maximum pressure on Iran is inevitable. One is, you know, if we were to offshore balance, Israel would rearm. That's sort of like the pro stuff that was conceded out of the 1AR, which means Israel would get more nuclear weapons, which means Iran would still fear things, cascades to spirals. Yes, it would cause some sort of war because Jews hate the Arabs and vice versa. That's just kind of like the historical tension stuff that Max was referring to. And the second thing, the reason why maximum pressure on Iran would also be inevitable is because the United States still pursues hegemony like inevitably, which means Iran would still feel pressured in the face of the United States. Last thing, I don't think offshore balancing answers China because 2AR is like offshore balancing too slow. If we have our carriers like, I don't know how far away, but if we have our carriers far away, that kind of green lights China to sort of invade, attack China. I don't know, something along those lines. I have like a few things about the debate, but I'll let the other judges go.
Yeah, I can go next unless you want to, Truman. Cool. I actually think I kind of unironically agree with the first thing Ben said. I think the neg might be on the wrong side of this debate, but I think the 2AR is a little too new in Iran. I don't really feel comfortable giving the amount of stuff that may be true in the 2AR when the 1AR was like, no, Israel attacks now, and basically that's it, which was not a complete argument. To me, The TNR is doing a lot of stuff with Iran that I think outweighs a transition or great power war offense mitigated by offshore balancing. The Mearsheimer and Walt evidence is decent enough and consistent with TNR explanation that offshore balancing still preserves U.S. primacy without allowing for an American fortress, which would encourage balancing of great powers and decreases the risk of conflict that results from a U.S. regime. The TNR, as well as the Mearsheimer evidence, says that onshore balancing could happen when necessary, which would solve the remainder of AF transition wars, offense, China rise stuff that Ben was talking about. Other things, I think if the AF, even if the AF was completely right about offshore balancing, the TNR does make this argument, not great argument, about specificity of scenarios being good. War scenario for transition wars is vague, not sure who gets drawn in, what happens. You know, we obviously know the escalation for Iran, Middle East war, et cetera, which I think the 2AR definitely can answer, you know, obviously cult of specificity, stuff like that. This probably doesn't matter. But yeah, I think offshore balancing mitigates the impact of transition wars and Iran outweighs.
My RFD's pretty similar to Gordon's. I will not give my stance on if I think Hedge is good or bad. I think the Iran scenario definitely outweighs. I think there's a lot of 2R analysis here, and not enough of the 2ER that make me think Iran outweighs, which means I'm more I don't know the word. I think there's a larger burden of the 2ER to win offense on Iran. But I also agree with Gordon. I think a lot of this defense on Iran feels like very new, and I'm sort of like very hesitant to sort of give that to the 2ER. I think the 2R is possibly winning this sort of like FET-wise analysis about Hedge not being super effective. I think it does answer the China scenario because it proves that like the US would not be very good in China. I think even if the 2ER is sort of winning, that like Russia might be an example of like the US being good. I'm not sure how it answers the rest of FET-wise's like sort of statistical analysis about the US just generally being bad whenever it intervenes, which means I think there's like a possible risk that Hedge isn't that good. I think I also agree with Gordon on the offshoring stuff. I think there's a possible risk that it's able to resolve the affirmative. I think like this 2R analysis about like what offshoring actually is should probably be more in the 1ER. I think this sort of like explanation being a little bit new sort of like makes me a little bit hesitant, but I think there's a pretty good risk that Hedge doesn't resolve the China stuff, and I think the Iran stuff definitely outweighs. Do y'all have any questions?
I don't have anything. Thank y'all for judging. It was a beautiful round, Max.
Yeah, I don't either. Great debate, Kagi. Thank you for judging this glorious proceeding.
All right. Have a good one, y'all.
Well, pleasure.
Good debate.